Hello, my name is Debbie Boone, and I want to welcome you to my podcast, The Bend, where we explore how successful people navigated the path and emerged in a better place when life threw them an unexpected twist. It's inspired by one of my favorite sayings: the bend in the road is not the end of the road unless you fail to make the curve. These conversations will hopefully help you and inspire you to embrace your personal bend and to flourish. I hope you enjoy it, and if you need help with your own personal navigation and you're in veterinary medicine, please feel free to reach out to me at Debbie Boone to Manage Vets Consulting. Enjoy the bend and be inspired by our wonderful guest. Welcome. Well, good morning or good afternoon whenever you're listening to this, and welcome everyone back to The Bend. My name is Debbie Boone, and I am your host today. And today our guest is Travis Bloom. Now, Travis has spent his last 8 years building web applications that consumers love to use. He first was doing it for General Electric in their IT leadership program, and then most recently at Rocket Trip, where he led the engineering team. He lives in New York City, where he spends most of his free time playing fetch with his cat Jenny and biking around the city. Travis is one of the co-founders of Pawlicy Advisors, and we're going to talk a little bit about that because it is a startup, but it's getting a lot of traction, obviously, and I'm a fan, so I'm trying to help getting the word out a little bit for it because I think it's such a good idea for animals and veterinary hospitals, and it takes a lot of the burden off that. So Travis, thanks for coming on. Welcome.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, Debbie. Really excited to chat about policy and my career.
Yeah. So let's start out with, kind of a little bit of your background. Tell me, how you got started and what were your original plans in life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a East Coast boy, grew up in the suburbs of New York City. And when I think through what my career trajectory was like, from a very, very young age, we're talking like from like 1 to 5, I was on the lawyer track because my grandfather was, obsessed with the idea of me practicing law. And I was a pretty argumentative little kid. So that kind of jived well with that career track. But I think, when I think through where I really seriously started thinking about my career trajectory, it was in high school. And in high school, I started getting really interested in the internet and specifically all the really interesting technologies that were being built on top of it. So as you mentioned, I'm a software engineer. Originally was excited to do the business side of tech companies. Started following Facebook very early on, I'm talking, 2010, 2011, and trying to understand, what Zuckerberg was doing there and how he managed to build a company at scale there. And then went into college with the idea that I wanted to do tech things, but more on the business side. So I didn't know how to code. I had no software engineering experience at all. And I actually went to University of Connecticut, go Huskies. Originally went in as like a general undecided business major. And my freshman year, there was a 1-credit course where all of the professors from all the different business degrees came in and spoke about what their major was all about. And UConn has a degree called Management Information Systems, which is in the business school. So you learn accounting, finance, management, marketing, but there's a concentration in IT. So you do some very basic software engineering classes and some basic network and IT focused coursework. And I kind of fell in love after hearing about the opportunity and kind of that meld of business and IT. So that kind of set me on my trajectory into college. Happy to talk about career stuff, but it was kind of my intro into software
It's kind of funny how life will just throw you these little tidbits and you go, oh, I never knew that. I never thought about that. Never even knew that existed. And I think that's an interesting thing that happens. I know that when I was going to college, much longer ago than you, and I had always wanted to be a veterinarian. But then when I got out, I had a lot of business background because my family owned businesses. And it didn't really occur to me that I could manage a hospital, that was a career. And I think that is true for a lot of people who kind of set out into, they have this kind of overarching goal of for you, it was like some kind of business thing, but then delving into the kind of the fine points of it, that people don't really realize there's opportunities out there. And there's a lot of opportunities for people who are, in multiple career paths to either work in veterinary medicine, or for those in veterinary medicine to go outside of just that really strict definition of it and do things, very similar things to what you guys are doing with your Pawlicy Advisors. So tell me about, as you moved into, you found this interest, how did you kind of set about creating a goal to become somebody who could write apps? I mean, to me, this is an amazing and fascinating thing, because when I was in college, my roommate was a computer software major. And honest to God, I'm going to tell my age and it's embarrassing, but I don't care. She would come back to the room with cardboard boxes filled with punch cards.
Oh my God.
And the computers, of course, at NC State, it's always been a really techie engineering school. And the computers would fill up entire rooms because they were so huge, and now we could do that same equivalent on a cell phone. So it's just, I've seen it go like, wow, this is amazing stuff. So tell me kind of what was your plan then? And like, what, you saw a path going forward, and how are you going to reach that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so what's interesting about me, right, is I don't actually have a traditional computer science background. So I did management information systems, which had some very basic coding classes, but pretty much all of my, technical expertise is self-taught. So around my junior year of college, when I started taking my degree more seriously, I was like, okay, if the degree was preparing me to basically be like an IT manager, so someone who could interface with engineers and talk to them, but was much more high level and business focused. And I was interested in diving deeper and really, getting that technical background. And I think what's interesting about my story, and something I tell people, is like anyone can teach themselves to code. When you think through career trajectories, there's more online resources available to really develop as a software engineer self-taught than almost any other trajectory in the world, because who's building online resources? Software engineers. So I mean, it's just the internet is an incredible wealth of knowledge there. So I actually, in my spare time while I was still at school, I started building apps. And it's I tell anyone who's learning how to code, it's just you bash your head against the wall for 5 hours trying to fix this one little thing, and then you remember that one little thing for the rest of your life, right? And it gets easier. It really is one of those things where it's just trial and error. And people are like, well, how do you know how to do this? And it's like, software engineers are really good at Googling questions. That's it's true.
Yes.
So much of it is just like, why, like you copy paste this error you see in your computer, and you go on this 20-minute journey into some random website to find out why that's propagating. But I actually launched it was kind of a Rate My Professor-esque web app at UConn my senior year. I called it myeasyclass.com. The website's no longer up, so I've hidden that questionable design decisions from my childhood from the internet. But yeah, I had over a third of the campus using it.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, it was really cool to kind of rate classes, and the onus for that was just, I was always seeing on Facebook, people were like, I need 6 credits for this semester that are unrelated to my major. Like, so it's for people who are not interested in like I don't need something that I'm interested in for my major. I just need to fill this schedule so I can graduate
with an easy A.
Literally.
I need an easy A. Yeah.
An easy A was definitely the undertones of the application. So that was kind of how I went down the career trajectory to software engineering. And then at GE, the program I was in was also more focused on people who are business focused and not actually coding. So it's more focused for MIS majors. But GE at the time, I don't know if you remember this, there were like all those commercials back in the day with GE was basically trying to become like the digital company when I joined the company. So they were starting to give out more technical roles to people in my leadership development program. And I just grabbed every single one I could. So my program was 4 jobs for 6 months each over the course of 2 years. That's the way they structured it. And I did a project management non-technical role for my first one, and I hated it more than anything. And then I stole every technical role that was available for the next 3. And that's really where I was fortunate in the sense that I basically got a company to pay me while I learned the skill set I needed to succeed in this new career. So really grateful for my experience at GE for that.
So tell me, how did life throw you a curve? I mean, how did you, because it sounds like you were pretty happy there, and then what?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I mentioned this earlier, I've always been interested in startups. And I never really knew if I would have the guts to start my own business, right? Because I guess it's pretty silly for a startup founder to say they're risk averse, but I've always considered myself risk averse. I'm like the kind of guy who reads like personal finance blogs. Who's like, okay, so if I set aside this amount for retirement and do, basic compound interest, I'll be right. So I'm like very like, this is the way you do it, structured life kind of person. But I think a repeating theme in my life, and I'll probably talk about it later also, is just the idea that anytime I'm faced with a decision, it's like, the question is like, will I regret this for the rest of my life if I don't try it? Right. And if you answer that question, yes, then like you have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So at GE, at the end of my program, I was actually, I was offered a full-time role on the team that I was working on. They were super pumped for me. I was one of the, I guess tooting my own horn here, but I was one of the top performing kids in my program. So I had a really bright future at GE. But I always knew I wanted to start a company. And the best way of learning how to start a company is to go learn from someone who just started a company, right? So I knew I had to go join a startup, and that led me to Rocket Trip in New York City in 2015, where I joined as a software engineer. So my strategy was like, okay, GE's 300,000 employees, Rocket Trip's 25 employees, so getting a lot smaller there, and then maybe I'll do a 5-person company and a 3-person company, and then maybe I'll start my own company when I'm like 40 or something, right? That was kind of this opaque idea I had in my mind. And then I guess the question around like, how did life throw you a curveball was, spent 3.5 years at Rocket Trip, was promoted into a lead engineering role and was ready to leave. I'd learned a lot there, had a fantastic experience. And I told the CEO of the company, I was like, hey, I think I'm ready for my next challenge, which some people say is a bad idea because then your employer knows that you're unhappy. But I have a really close relationship with him. He actually is an investor in Pawlicy Advisor, and I meet with him on a regular basis now. And the best advice he gave to me was, at the time I was like, well, I'm thinking of like joining like a 5-person startup so I can learn more before I'm eventually ready to start my own company, right? I was basically trying to delay the starting the company thing and justify another relative, not low risk, but less risky career decision. And he said, you will not learn anything new if you go work at a 5-person company than you worked at a 25-person company. And he said, if you're going to start a company, just do it, right? And I think that was probably the biggest curveball in my life, where he basically like, he said like, and then, I listened to him, then I like was back and forth for months. And then one day he said to me, he's like, you know what, I don't think you're the kind of person who's ready for this, because you'd be more gung-ho about it than you are. So I think you should take that role at the other company I was looking at. And I don't know if he was just, purposely manipulating with that comment, but yeah, that lit a fire under my butt, I guess, to take the leap. And that was pretty scary.
I think that is a hard decision, and sometimes it's just jumping in the deep end of the water, right? You just have to just do it. And a lot of times I'm teaching classes and I talk to the veterinarians, and we have to talk about money. And I laugh and say, if we had to talk about money or we have to talk about death, we would prefer to talk about death, because money, we don't like to talk about money. And I said, what's the worst thing that can happen, right? And so I make everybody say no out loud about 4 times, and they look at each other and went, now look around, and they go, what? And I went, look, nobody died. It's okay. It'll be all right. And either it will or it won't, but at least if you do take the chance and you take the risk, that you can look back on your life and go, I tried. I know, even if it failed, I did try. And I'm sure you read a lot about entrepreneurs, and I always have too. And the fact is that most of them at some point in time have been flat broke, and they just keep chugging along because they do believe in themselves. My father owned 6 restaurants, but he started out he did a chicken farm. He did all kinds of stuff. He sold pots and pans. He did all kinds of stuff before, the idea hit, and he found the idea. So tell me a little bit about, what the scariest part of you saying, okay, now I'm going to start my company.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what you're talking about around money resonates a lot with me. I had basically built up like a little, essentially funds to buy a house one day, right? So full context here, around the same time I was leaving Rocket Trip, I proposed to my girlfriend of 6 years. So on top of, understanding my career path, I was now also planning a wedding. And, she's a woman of respectable tastes, which means it was not going to be a backyard affair, so to speak. So finances were definitely first and foremost on my mind, outside of, starting a company, and then adding on that anxiety was definitely an interesting curveball. But, what you just said was literally, it's funny you said that, because it resonates with me a lot, where, you ask yourself the question, okay, what's the worst that happens, right? Mm-hmm. So say I forego a salary for a year and a half and invest all my time and energy into this thing that inevitably fails. What's the worst that happens? And I settled on, well, the worst that happens is I'm financially set back a few years and I have to go get a job, right? Like that, I'm extremely fortunate in the fact that I work in a profession that's very high demand, right? Software engineering. And I kind of did that assessment and realized, okay, either I'm going to regret this for the rest of my life, or I'm going to lose a decent chunk of cash and I have to go get a job and start over, so to speak. And that kind of solidified it for me that, I didn't want to be looking back at this decision in 5 years and be like, God, like, why did I not take that chance? Because I know, I kind of knew that like this was the moment, in the sense that I was getting married. I was, I'm probably going to have kids in a few years, right? So I always tell people you can start a company at any point in your life. And I truly do believe that. But for me, this was like, okay, like timing wise, it's not going to get better than this. Mm-hmm. So kind of take the leap of faith. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then that, this going from a salary to zero salary with no clear path to making a salary again is terrifying, especially for someone that's not really risk averse. So that was pretty awful.
Yeah. When I started my company, it was 2008. Now everyone should start a company in a recession. And I had been laid off from the veterinary hospital, and I was making a pretty significant salary. It was over 6 figures. But my husband looked at me one day, and I just assumed I'd have a job in no time flat, because I knew everybody everywhere around me, and they knew me. But it was a recession, right? Nobody was hiring at all. And my husband just looked at me one day and he said, look, you've always wanted to be a consultant. You've been doing this on the side. Just do it. And right. I said, really? And he said, yeah. And I went, good. And that's it. I mean, I just, you just say, okay, I'm going to name my company this. I'm going to here's my Gmail account. And then I didn't know what to do that, but I knew I needed to build content. Right. And you had to start somewhere. So just talking about the things that I had been talking about for a long time, I just started that. And then I started working the network. And I think that that's a huge component of any startup business's success, is to get the message out to the people who can give you a leg up. And so tell me a little bit about how what made you decide to start Pawlicy? I mean, it's an unusual company, really, when you think about it. I love it. I mean, this is such a good idea. And when you guys just reached out to me, I'm like, oh my God, this is a great idea. So tell me a little bit about how you kind of came up with the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And just context for your listeners, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're a Pawlicy Advisor, is a pet insurance marketplace. So think of us like Priceline for pet insurance. So consumers use us to find great deals on insurance, and vets use us so they can kind of offset that insurance conversation to a trusted third party. To your question, it's funny, the conversation around networking was really applicable to me in that context. So when I was at Rocket Trip and I told the CEO that I was ready to leave and start my own business, I didn't have a commercially viable business idea of my own. I had built a bunch of fun apps, but nothing that I was like, okay, there's a clear path to profitability and monetization. So I actually ended up, for lack of a better word, founder dating for 6 months, where I said to myself, I'm a great software engineer. I'd like to think of myself as a great business person too. I'm going to go and find someone who's got a fantastic idea and needs that technical skill set to bring it to fruition. And at the same time I was going through this process, I bought my first animal as an adult. Adopted. So we adopted Ginny, my domestic short hair cat, who's off in the corner over there, from a shelter in New York City with my wife. And when we adopted her, I had heard about pet insurance, and kind of just thought it was a thing I was supposed to do as a pet owner. But I'm also very familiar with like self-insuring, right? So the idea that like if you have enough money in a savings account, insurance might not be necessary for you. So I asked my wife, I said, hey, like, I don't know about this pet insurance thing. Let's have a real conversation. I said, you're getting this animal. How much money would you be willing to spend on Ginny before we'd have to consider, really uncomfortable conversations around, the long-term health of our animal. And she said, I will go bankrupt before I let this animal die.
Ooh.
And I said, we're getting pet insurance. It was that simple of a conversation, right? Because and what I always tell people now is, the pet insurance is for two people. It's for people who can't afford that $5,000 medical expense if it were to come up, but it's also for the people that could afford it and don't want the emotional strain of having to even think of that, right? So say you have a savings account with $20,000 in it. Mm-hmm. Well, that's still money that you're going to have to think about spending in the event of a catastrophic illness. So for me, it was an easy decision to get pet insurance. And this is before I had any inkling of starting a pet insurance company. So the cat decision, the pet insurance decision is literally all happening while I'm meeting with probably 2 to 3 different founders a week. Literally founder dating. Like it's exactly what you would expect that phrase to mean. It's meeting people for coffee and trying to figure them out.
But Travis, how did you find the people to meet? I mean, I think that's a very unusual, and you're in New York, so maybe it's a little bit easier there, but how do you find the people to meet?
Absolutely. It is very unusual, right? Conventional wisdom is start a company with someone you've worked with previously, right? But I didn't have that. So you're absolutely right that it is a little odd. Some of it was through personal networks. So my talking about networking, the CEO of Rocket Trip was well connected in the venture capital community, and I spoke with a bunch of venture capitalists, and I was like, hey, do you have anyone who's looking for a technical counterpart? I'd love to meet with them. And I met with a decent amount of people there. And you would think that that's how I met Woody, my co-founder, and started the company, but that's not the case. I basically went on, it's a pretty god-awful website. It's like, it was cofounderlabs.com. I'm not affiliated with them or anything like that. And there weren't a lot of criteria to filter people out. So it was kind of like anyone who wanted to be on that site could be on that site. So I met with a lot of, questionable people. And I'll never forget what the CEO of Rocket Trip said to me. He said, you need to go find what good looks like. And the only way you're going to know what good looks like is if you meet a lot of bad, to be frank, right? So I met with probably 50 plus people. And Woody was on Co-Founder Labs because at the time he was trying to find someone for Pawlicy Advisor. So the story of Pawlicy Advisor is Woody started in April of 2018 while he was getting his MBA at Columbia. He has a Sharpei, which has a very rare genetic disorder that ends up costing hundreds of dollars a month. And he was fortunate that he had pet insurance that covered it. But what he soon learned was that there were insurance companies out there that wouldn't have covered that condition. Mm-hmm. And that got him thinking long and hard about how to build transparency into the purchasing decision for pet insurance, right? And one route is to build an insurer. But what he realized early on is that there's so many pet insurance companies, and the issue is not that there needs to be another one. The issue is that consumers need to understand their options and to really find better transparency in the purchasing process. So that's how he started it. So back to where I'm in this story, you know, he posted a profile on Co-Founder Labs, and I read about it. And because I had literally the week beforehand just purchased pet insurance for my cat, I was like, oh, like I have no idea why I picked the insurance company I did. A marketplace makes a ton of sense. So we met up at a Starbucks on Upper West Side, and literally met off and on for pretty much 3 months before I basically we went on. The story is we met off and on for 3 months, and then in October of 2018, we went on a 7-hour hike in upstate New York in essentially the snow because it was snowing up then, to kind of as like a final test and to really, you know, solidify our partnership. We're like, all right, if we can tolerate each other for a 7-hour hike, maybe we can build a business together. This is after we met a bunch of times, but yeah, that was kind of the co-founding moment of our partnership, basically.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So tell me about like the greatest challenge that you guys had of bringing this marketplace to the marketplace.
Yeah, I think anytime so I have a different answer than Woody, because Woody was working on the business for a while before me. And what Woody managed to do is he managed to convince these insurance companies to take a huge leap of faith on an unknown brand, right? I mean, fundamentally, when you're an entrepreneur and you're a marketplace, you're trying to sell a multi-billion-dollar company's product. And you know, he doesn't even have a technical co-founder at this point. So one of the reasons I joined Woody was that I found it so impressive that he had developed these relationships and these partnerships with, you know, nothing, with a deck, right? With a vision, and he was able to really push forward and you know, first of all, he convinced me. So like, you know, I was like, all right, this guy's good at convincing people, clearly. But yeah, convincing the insurance companies. But I think once I joined, the hardest part of Pawlicy Advisor, and the greatest challenge we really faced was understanding how to get in front of consumers and educate them about pet insurance. So most people don't know that only 2% of Americans have pet insurance for their animal. And so it's a very underutilized product. It's rapidly growing. It's the fastest growing line of voluntary insurance in the US. But one of the reasons we started the company is we're like, this is a product that we both think every pet owner should have and that no pet owner has. So it's like, you know, if you're a startup.
And every veterinarian will agree with you about that too.
Exactly.
At this point in the game, you know, I can tell you that, you know, like I said, I've been doing this since 1985, and I used to have people ask me about pet insurance. And at that point in the game, it was more like Aflac than anything else, right? So I would say, well, you know, I've seen it used. I've seen some people who have benefited from it, but rarely have I seen people who had a benefit from it. And you're probably better off with a pet savings account that you will. But then again, medicine was less complicated. You know, when all you were doing was giving steroid injections and passing out prednisone because of flea allergy dermatitis, it was a pretty simple world. And we weren't doing MRIs and CT scans and kidney transplants and all the kind of incredible things that I just, looking back on my career, I'm thinking, wow, it's traveled so rapidly as far as what we can do for pets now and what people will willingly afford for people to do for their pets. It's kind of an amazing thing. But any person that is in veterinary, the veterinary business will absolutely agree that pet insurance is going to save a lot of heartache for pet owners. And the worst discussion we have really is those discussions when people don't have the finances to fix the animals, and we know we can. And so it puts us in this horrible position of, and very frustrated position too, because, it's sometimes the fix is not that complicated.
Yep.
And so, yeah, it's just a simple, just thinking ahead, planning ahead, like, purchasing a policy when they're young, and getting people on board. But it is confusing. And I think that's where you guys come in. It is very confusing, and there's a lot out there.
Yeah, we try and, ultimately, when you're talking with someone about their insurance options, there's two buckets, right? There's how much of the coverage do you want? And then there's how much do you want it to cost, right? Because ultimately, every conversation is a trade-off between cost and coverage.
Mm-hmm.
So what we do at Pawlicy Advisor, we basically have a coverage score and a lifetime cost score. And we do actually recommend a policy based on those two scores, but we provide those scores to the consumer so that they can make that personal decision where it's like, well, this policy is going to cover homeopathy and the other one doesn't cover homeopathy, but it's also 15% more a month and it's projected out to be more expensive over the lifetime of my animal. So I'm okay foregoing homeopathy and, taking a better value option essentially, right? And to your point, vets have really valued us as a business because they want people to have insurance, but they don't know who to recommend. And we hear from vets all the time, they don't want to get involved in that financing conversation, right? They view themselves as, we like to say, we'll handle the insurance, you focus on gold standard care, right? And what insurance allows vets to do is provide the treatment recommendations that they want to provide.
Yes. Well, it really is a challenge, I think, for veterinarians and veterinary teams, because we don't want to be insurance salespeople, but we do know that this is a good thing for pets. But then again, we don't have time to go through all those policies and all those different options and choices. And it is difficult to advise people. But I think the advice that we would give people is that this is a good idea and that you should find a tool that helps you choose the right policy for you, but you should have a policy. And that's as far as we need to take it in veterinary medicine. And then, other people can step into that void. And I think that's kind of where you've come into, is there's that void there where people say, okay, but who, and you're like, no, put these parameters in and let the algorithm figure it out for you, because this is not something that veterinarians need to be doing. And nor do we have the time. That's the other thing. We already have enough on our plate without having to have a conversation about which insurance policy is best for you. So, as you were starting this company and kind of laying it out, and obviously Woody is the rainmaker here. I don't know if he was the one who talked to me first or you. I can't remember. But tell me how networking is helping you guys. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back on, when we started the company, what was really challenging was for us to find a way of educating people about pet insurance. And we knew that the veterinary space was interesting, but we didn't know how interesting it was. So on a whim, literally Woody and I took his car down to AVMA 2018, 2019, back when we could meet in person, right?
Yeah.
And we went down to DC and we literally bought last minute the cheapest booth. We went to Staples a few hours before the conference and printed out a banner to put behind our booth at AVMA. And we were like, all right, if we can get like 10 vets to stop at this booth and get excited, then like maybe the vet space will be interesting for us and maybe vets are interested in our product. And within 3 hours of the conference, we realized we need to focus on helping veterinarians with insurance more than we are focusing on anything else right now. Because we saw, as a founder, you're always looking for product market fit, where you're looking for like a sign that what you've built really resonates with your consumers. And we had found that our marketplace had resonated with pet parents who are trying to evaluate these options. But when we spoke with vets and they stopped and kind of heard what we were working on, that was like almost even more of a light bulb moment in terms of we are really solving a pain point for vets as much as we're solving for consumers. So on the networking front, we look at networking at these vet conferences as not just instrumental in helping get the brand out of Pawlicy Advisor, but it was really instrumental in understanding what we should be building and who we should be servicing. And it was at that point that we realized we need to be, you know, as focused on vets as we are focused on pet parents, and building a product that they're both in love with.
Yeah. Well, and I know that, you know, we've had conversations about things that you were planning on launching in veterinary hospitals, and kind of gave you the perspective of what it's like on the other side of the exam table and to be dealing with that. So I think you did, you know, some wise things, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that you reached out to, is to find out where the friction is in those places that, you know, because I think a lot of times business will come into the veterinary space and they go, oh, here, you should talk about this and you should talk about that. And they don't really understand what they're asking us to do, that we are already completely overwhelmed with what we've already need to talk to people about. And, you know, not to mention the consumer's attention span is fairly short, and it gets shorter all the time. So trying to get their attention about the care that they need to be giving to their pet, and then add on to that a discussion about pet insurance and, you know, microchipping, and, you know, I mean, there's a million different things that need to be talked about. So, you know, you kind of took that off our plate, and for me, because I teach teams a lot, I'm like eternally grateful for you. We don't have to talk about that much anymore, to say, here, go to this site. But you've actually managed to integrate it into many of the software platforms, so where we don't even have to say, here, go to this site and look up what kind of insurance you need. So I don't want this to be an advertisement for Pawlicy, but I do want people to understand how it works and why I think it's a good idea. So tell a little bit about, you know, how it integrates with the software and how it works, you know, in that platform.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so when we work with veterinary teams, the first thing we say is, in order for you to have a successful pet insurance conversation, your staff needs to be educated and enthusiastic and excited about the product, right? And that starts with, you know, very low tech solutions like lunch and learns. So we provide virtual lunch and learns for almost all of the staff at clinics that work with us. We pay for the food, and we mail brochures. So we do, you know, non-digital brochures because they're still valuable. And we hear from vets all the time, hey, you know, instead of giving your patient 12 brochures, just give them one. And it increases the chance that they'll actually look into pet insurance. And what you're talking about is, so we're developing, we've developed essentially a new digital solution for veterinary offices who want to proactively have the conversation with their patients, but might not have the time to actively bring it up. So what we've done is we communicate directly with the vet office's patients, so that instead of a vet having to go to someone and say, hey, you should get pet insurance, what ends up happening is the patient says, hey, I got your education about insurance, I have some more questions about it, right? And then the vet is being prompted and asked about the product, instead of them having to sell it and you know, push something on a consumer. So it's been an incredible learning process for us as a company in terms of partnering with our vet partners and networking in the vet community to figure out what is the right way of approaching that insurance conversation with the consumer. And what we've developed, and our vet partners are really excited about it, is the idea that we can provide upfront education so that when they come in for that appointment, they're prompting the vet to have that conversation. And we found that to be much more effective.
Yes. Yeah. So you just kind of lay the groundwork. And as someone who, I love marketing, it's one of my favorite parts of business development for veterinarians. And it's about pushing information out to people at a time when they're not in your office, because when they're in our building, they're very distracted. And, you know, we're talking about things typically that they're not medically knowledgeable about. So keeping their attention on that and being able to explain that well. We have other things that we need to educate people about. And then having that groundwork laid ahead of time. So it's the same thing with vaccine and preventative care. And you push that information out all year long, not trying to do it all in the visit when they're standing in front of you, because it's information overload. It's just too much at that point in time. It's just, you know, you got to pick your battles. And what is the most important thing for you to talk about? Well, you know, if this is a 10-year-old cat, you're certainly going to press a conversation about blood panels and
Right.
diagnostics much more than you're going to talk about pet insurance. Not to mention the fact that pet insurance is going to go, yes, this is a 10-year-old cat. Here's the policy. Why it's this much money. So you should have got that when he was a kid.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
the pre-existing conditions conversation is essential, right? So
oh yeah.
we talk with so many consumers where it's like, they come to us and say, "Hey, I have a medical bill I need paid for. Should I get insurance?" And our answer is, "Listen, we think insurance might cover other situations, but it's not going to cover the
Mm-mm.
situation you're in right now." And that's why, in addition to insurance, we do a lot of treatment financing conversations. So we
Mhm.
help consumers navigate whether it's care credit or scratch pay. We help those consumers regardless of where they are in their animal's life. If it's a new
Mhm.
puppy, insurance is the right answer. If
Mhm.
they're an old animal and there's medical complications,
Mhm.
there are other financial tools they can use to make sure they can, accept that gold standard care at the vet
Mhm.
office.
Yeah, I just gave a webinar for Vitus Pay, and they have a tool called Vitus Pay, and it actually just enables the consumer to split their bill. So instead of having a $500 hit on your credit card, you can divide it out into 100, 100, 100 for 5 times. And some people that that works for them because it's not another line of credit. A lot
Yep.
of people just don't want another line of credit, depending on they're working on their credit score, or they've got a goal in mind, like buying a house or something like that. So I think having a lot of different options is really important when it comes to that. But, also just that education piece about, if you're going to get pet insurance, get it when your animal is young, and pay attention to the restrictions of the policies, which is, I think, where you help, because even you go breed specific, there are breed specific problems that insurance companies are not going to cover. They're going to rule those things out. Some, and some don't. So, what breed did you get? Well, if you've got a bulldog, you need to pay attention to
Yeah, yeah.
that, because there's a lot of stuff that goes wrong with bulldogs, and we know those things, that happen. Travis, I don't want to overstep my welcome here,
Oh,
but
you're good.
let me ask you this. Looking at somebody who's making these big career decisions and making that leap into thinking about, should they start their own company or should they change jobs? What advice would you give people, in stepping back? I mean, you said, you talked to the president of Rocket Trip, and he went, you need to make this move, but you'd been thinking about it for months. So what advice would you give people?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's something I said beforehand where, a lot of times when I'm faced with these decisions where I'm excited about it, but I'm also terrified, like the number one question you have to ask yourself is, if I don't do this, will I regret it for the rest of my life? And then the question we were asking earlier, which is, what's the worst that could happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if there's a terrifying decision and the worst that happens is, destitute and homelessness, then like, yeah, like maybe, make sure you're
Pull back
looking,
on that a little.
yeah, looking out for the, financial well-being of your health and your family and things like that. But if you are in a situation where you're capable of taking a risk, and it might set you back if it doesn't go the way you want, but you're not gonna, you're gonna be alive and healthy and ready to move on to the next challenge, then take that risk. And really just make sure you understand what your own risk thresholds are, and then make sure you understand, what is going to keep you up at night in 10 years? Is it going to be, oh my God, I lost a year's worth of salary? Or is it going to be, oh my God, I never even tried being an entrepreneur, right? And
Mm-hmm.
for me, it was clearly the second.
Mm-hmm. Now, one thing that you did say that I think that is important is you were prepared. You said you had, consciously been financially astute, and you had a little cushion.
Right.
And sometimes that's a challenge for people, especially when they're working in jobs that are not tech jobs, that are not that high paying, but still making sure that you are thinking, if this is in your mind, that you have got that cushion, you've figured out how to stockpile it, or you've figured out how to, get some financing, or, maybe there's family that will help you. That's always an opportunity. And I'm certainly, a lot of people have been helped by their family. Um, but you've gotta have some money to invest, even just to live. I mean, you have to eat, right? You still have to eat. So you've got to be judicious about your financial decision making too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm I'll be the first to say I'm incredibly privileged, right? I work I'm a software engineer, right? So I'm not, I started my entrepreneur journey from a position of privilege in the sense that I had that financing piggy bank that I had basically been building up for years to buy a house, then became my, started company fund, which my wife was very supportive of, which is nice. But to your point around being prepared, right? If you can be prepared financially, you absolutely should be. If you're in a situation like you mentioned where you don't have that high paying job, there's other things you can do to be prepared that are not finance related, right? So whether it's developing that skill set you need in a frugal manner. I talk with people all the time who are looking to become a software engineer. I'm like, don't go get a 4-year degree in software engineering if you've already got a college degree. Like, learn online, like use free resources, use free tools. And outside of programming and in other professions, the same advice applies, where there's fiscally responsible ways of preparing yourself from wherever it's next in your journey, and building that confidence you need to make that big decision, like you're saying.
Yeah, there's so much information available online. You're exactly right. I look at things like Coursera. If you don't want the credits, which at this point in my life, I mean, I don't care about college credits, absolutely. But I care about the knowledge. And so how do you can go out there and get the knowledge, and you don't have to have the diploma or the certification after it, and then put it to use for your own business. So one of the things that I love is guerrilla marketing. And how do you, like, if you're kind of grinding, tell me like some guerrilla marketing tips that somebody who was just getting started could use. Doesn't cost much money, maybe not cost anything, to reach out and get your business known.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think, in the theme of networking we've been talking about, I think finding someone who is going to, like, what's interesting about our product is we needed to guerrilla market to get the word out about pet insurance. And the best way of doing it is by finding someone who's going to be a huge advocate for your product, right? And we found that in the veterinary channel. Like, and you can take that same thought process and apply it to other industries where you say, okay, I'm solving a pain point for consumers, but who else am I solving a pain point for? And would they promote my product to those people because I'm adding value to them as well, right? So I obsess about this all the time now, because I'm always thinking of, like, what's my next company 20 years from now. And there's so much in the vet space, and there's so much potential to improve the lives of vets. And the question I always go down is, like, who has a real problem that I can solve that's going to make them fanatical about recommending my product to other people? So when I think, guerrilla marketing wise, it's really, Paul Graham is a very famous venture capitalist. He started Y Combinator, one of the best startup incubators in the world. And his simple advice is just build something that people want. And I know that sounds really overly simplistic, but when you look at our trajectory as a business, by building something consumers want, and then realizing we built something that's incredibly valuable to veterinary teams, we were able to bootstrap both sides of the business at the same time. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, it's just the basic premise of any business is find a need and fill it.
Yep.
And if the consumer is out there, and you look at some things, like, my husband is always funny. He says, I wish I'd invented the toothpick. I mean, it's something that simple,
Great.
But how many toothpicks do people buy or use in their lives? And so it's a simple little thing, but it's something that fills a very specific need that humans have. Yeah. And so when we think, I think sometimes people think, oh, I have to start like something huge. It has to be complex. But it really doesn't. It doesn't have to be that hard or that complex. For my own business, I do consulting work, but most of my work has to do with building content that just helps people communicate better with each other. And veterinarians being very animal focused as opposed to human focused, it's a need that they need filled, whether they believe they need it filled or not, but they really do need it filled a lot. It would solve so many of their problems if they would just listen a little bit more. And it just makes life so much better. So if the goal is to help veterinarians and veterinary teams have a better life, and then that life lets animals have better and healthier lives, then that's both of my goals met. You know, it's help the team and help the pets. And so that's why I do what I do. But it's fairly specific, you know, and I think that's the other thing too, is be specific. A lot of times people try to do too much. It's too broad, and you have to find out what you love to do.
Right.
Because I can do bookkeeping, but I don't want to come in and keep your books. I
Yeah.
want to talk to you about how to get more money to put in there. You know, I don't want to talk to you about how to keep your books. So any final words of wisdom, just kind of an overview, entrepreneur life, any tips, tricks, books to read, anything that you think would be helpful to people?
I mean, on your point on like doing something that you love, I think, you know, one of the things that gets us amped and excited every day, you know, if you go and tell someone, oh, I'm an insurance salesman, right? That's not the most energizing thing, but like when we look at our mission at Pawlicy Advisor and how we're helping veterinarians and pet parents, we're literally saving animals' lives. Like at the end of the day, if someone buys insurance and they're able to afford the cost of treatment, we've saved an animal's life. So to your point on, you know, helping people and doing something you're passionate about, I think it's important to work at and to start ventures that you really feel like you're helping people, right? Whether it's helping veterinarians communicate the value of their decisions, or preparing, you know, pet parents for the financial hiccups that their animal might encounter, like we do. We're both really proud of what we do, and I think that's what enables us to work incredibly passionately at what we're focused on, right? You're not going to be successful if you're not passionate about what you're doing, and by uncovering what is the real joy and value you're bringing to the world, it's going to motivate you every day to wake up.
Well, and the other thing, the other side of that too, is you kind of worry about, as entrepreneurs, I know that we have offices in our homes. It's really easy at any hour of the day to go in and be at work, but it is an integration of your work and the joy that you get from it into your life. And that obviously, you went out and went for a 7-mile hike with Woody. So I'm sure that outdoors is part of what you do, but you also have to enjoy what you're doing when you're working, right? And understanding that's another part of the joy of your life, and to integrate that. And I don't think there's a balance. I think it's a seesaw. It's sometimes you're over here and sometimes you're over here. And that's quite all right. You know, if you're trying to say, oh, I must exercise 50% of the day and work 50% of the day, all that makes you feel is guilty about not doing it. I'm not going to do that. I would tell you right now, I'm not going to. So let's wrap up with, a little bit of information about how people can get in touch with you guys and the best way to reach out if they have any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Me personally, I'm Travis Bloom. I'm at Travis Bloom on Twitter. If you're interested in learning more about Pawlicy Advisor, go to pawlicy.com, Pawlicy, like Pawlicy, .com. And there's a for veterinarians section at the top of the page if you're a vet, or if you're a consumer and you're looking, you can just press get started and get a real-time price quote. And we're at Pawlicy Advisor on Twitter as well, if you want to follow us there.
Yeah. I am presently without pet, but I can guarantee you that when I do get another animal, and my husband keeps giving me the stink eye because he's like, what are you going to do with this dog when you travel? But I am without a dog for the first time in 3 years, and I want a dog. Every time it comes on TV, I'm like, oh, dog. So I probably shouldn't put that on the air, because I have so many veterinary friends who are like, hey, Deb, you really want a dog? I got this. I'm like, I think I just screwed up. Specific dog, very specific, small, fuzzy dog is what I want.
My parents have 2 toy poodles, so I'm very familiar with.
All right. So yeah, maybe a touch bigger than toy, but fuzzy. I want fuzzy. All right. So thank you very much again to Travis for joining me today on The Bend. And I hope that everyone gets some inspiration from that. And I also hope that they visit Pawlicy if they have pets, to find out what the best policy is for their animal. And I know that Travis would love to help you if you have any questions about the company, or about any of starting up a company, or maybe even creating an app. It could be your next big thing, right? You and Woody could have another new thing to do. So thank you again so much for joining us on this episode of The Bend.